The Forgotten World. The planet Xerox hung in space like a dying ember, its surface scarred by decades of ruthless mining operations. Once a thriving colony that fed the galaxy's endless hunger for rare minerals, it now stood as a monument to corporate greed and abandonment. When the last profitable vein ran dry, the mining companies simply packed up and left, taking their people, their equipment, and their promises with them. What remained was a world of perpetual gray skies and howling winds that carried the bitter taste of industrial decay. Jagged rock formations jutted from the barren ground like broken teeth, while crimson sand dunes shifted endlessly across the scarred landscape. The very air seemed to mourn what had been lost. In this desolation, something stirred. A pale figure moved through the shadows of a collapsed mining facility, its white fur stark against the dark metal wreckage. Elon, an albino wolf unlike any creature the galaxy had ever seen, padded silently across the wasteland that had become his prison. His icy blue eyes held an intelligence that spoke of genetic tampering, of laboratories and experiments conducted in sterile rooms by beings who saw him as nothing more than a test subject. He had been bred in the biolabs of the Galactic Consortium, part of an ambitious project to create the perfect predator. Enhanced strength, superior intelligence, lightning-fast reflexes, Elon possessed all of these and more. But his albinism, that striking white coat that made him visible for miles, was deemed a fatal flaw by his creators. What use was a weapon that couldn't hide? So they discarded him here, on Xerox, where his survival was left to chance and his death would go unnoticed. But Elon had not only survived, he had thrived in ways his creators never anticipated. Years of solitude had sharpened his mind, and the harsh environment had honed his already formidable abilities. He hunted the few remaining scavenger creatures that skittered through the ruins, growing stronger with each passing season. Yet for all his physical prowess, there was something missing from his existence. In the quiet moments between hunts, when the wind died down and the world fell still, Elon would find himself gazing at the stars. He remembered fragments of his early life, the touch of human hands, voices giving commands, the sterile smell of the laboratory. Those memories, faded though they were, represented the only connection he had ever known to something beyond this endless desolation. Each night, as he lay curled among the ruins, Elon wondered if he would spend eternity alone on this forgotten world. He had never expected an answer to that unspoken question, until the day a battered spacecraft descended through Xerox's gray clouds, its engine sputtering like an old man's cough. The ship was a patchwork of repairs and replacements, held together by determination and hope rather than proper engineering. Its hull bore the scars of countless journeys through asteroid fields and hostile space, each dent and scratch telling a story of survival against impossible odds. Inside the cockpit, Orin Vex wrestled with failing controls, his weathered hands dancing across a console that sparked and protested with every adjustment. His gray hair was disheveled, and his clothes bore the permanent stains of engine oil and cosmic dust, the uniform of a man who lived between worlds, belonging fully to none. Once, Orin had been renowned throughout the galaxy as a master mechanic, capable of coaxing life from the most hopeless machines. Ship captains would seek him out specifically, paying premium rates for his expertise. But time had a way of making even the most skilled obsolete, and newer, younger mechanics with fancy training had gradually pushed him to the margins of the industry. Now he wandered from system to system, taking odd jobs and living hand to mouth, his reputation preceding him only as a cautionary tale about the dangers of refusing to adapt. The ship beneath him was all he had left, a cranky old freighter he'd won in a card game 3 years ago, and which had been breaking down ever since. "Come on, old girl," he muttered as the ship shuddered through Xerox's thin atmosphere. Just a little longer. Orin hadn't planned to visit Xerox. Truth be told, he hadn't planned much of anything lately. But his ship needed parts, his credit account was nearly empty, and abandoned worlds sometimes yielded valuable salvage. It was worth a shot, even if the planet's reputation for being utterly lifeless meant the odds of finding anything useful were slim. The landing was rougher than he'd hoped, the ship bouncing twice before settling with a groan of protesting metal. Orin sat in the sudden silence, listening to the tick of cooling engines and the whistle of wind outside the hull. "All right," he said to no one in particular. Let's see what this rock has to offer. He gathered his tools and stepped out into the wasteland, immediately hit by the bitter cold and the overwhelming sense of emptiness that permeated Xerox. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the skeletal remains of mining equipment and the occasional pile of slag. Orin had been alone on many worlds, but this felt different. This felt like standing at the edge of the universe itself. He began his search methodically, checking the remains of excavation sites and processing facilities for anything that might be useful or valuable. Hours passed with nothing to show for his efforts but sore feet and a growing sense of futility. The mining companies had been thorough in their abandonment, taking everything of worth and leaving only rust and regret. Just as he was about to give up and return to his ship, a sound made him freeze. It was low and resonant, somewhere between a growl and a keen, the sound of something large and very much alive. Orin's hand moved instinctively to the plasma pistol at his hip as he scanned the surrounding terrain. His heart nearly stopped when he saw it, a massive white wolf standing atop a ridge not 50 meters away, its pale fur gleaming like polished bone against the dark rocks. Their eyes met across the wasteland, human brown and wolf blue, and in that moment, both beings felt something shift in their lonely existence. Neither could have imagined that this chance encounter would change the course of their lives forever. First contact. For what felt like an eternity, man and wolf stared at each other across the barren landscape. Orin's grip tightened on his weapon, but something held him back from drawing it. The creature before him was magnificent, easily the size of a small pony, with muscles that rippled beneath its pristine white coat. Its eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and there was something in its posture that spoke of wariness rather than aggression. Elon, for his part, found himself equally transfixed. He had encountered no living beings larger than scavenger rats in the years since his abandonment. The sight of this human, weathered, tired, but unmistakably alive, stirred something deep in his chest that he had thought long dead. "Easy there, big guy," Orin said softly, his voice carrying across the stillness. "I'm not looking for trouble." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Slowly, deliberately, Elon began to descend from the ridge, his movements fluid and controlled. Each step brought him closer to the first potential contact he'd had in years. Orin watched the approach with a mixture of fear and fascination. Everything about the creature screamed danger, the predatory grace of its movement, the size of its frame, the way its muscles coiled with contained power. But there was something else there too, something that reminded him of his own condition, loneliness. "You're not what I expected to find out here," Orin murmured as the wolf drew closer. "Hell, I wasn't expecting to find anything alive." Elon stopped about 10 feet away, settling back on his haunches. His blue eyes never left Orin's face, studying the human with the same intensity that Orin studied him. There was curiosity in that gaze, and something that might have been hope. Orin made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else. Slowly, he holstered his weapon and reached into his pack, pulling out a strip of dried meat from his emergency rations. It wasn't much, but it was an offering. "Here," he said, tossing the morsel gently so it landed midway between them. "It's not gourmet, but it's food." Elon sniffed the air, then looked at the meat, then back at Orin. The human scent carried no aggression, no fear, only a deep weariness that the wolf recognized all too well. After a moment's hesitation, Elon crept forward and delicately picked up the offering, chewing thoughtfully. "That's it," Orin encouraged, a smile tugging at his weathered features. "We're both just trying to get by, aren't we?" As if in response to his words, Elon's tail gave the slightest wag, barely perceptible, but unmistakably there. The gesture sent a warmth through Orin's chest that he hadn't felt in years. They spent the rest of the afternoon in each other's company, sharing the space if not yet fully trusting. Orin talked, about his ship, about the worlds he'd seen, about the loneliness of space, while Elon listened with an attention that felt almost human. The wolf's responses were subtle, a tilt of the head, a soft huff, the occasional repositioning that seemed to indicate agreement or understanding. As the day wore on, Orin found himself sharing more than just food. He told Elon about his fall from grace, about the way the galaxy had moved on without him, about the feeling of being discarded like a broken tool. And somehow, looking into those intelligent blue eyes, he felt like he was being understood in a way he hadn't been in years. "You know what I think?" Orin said as the sun began to set, painting the wasteland in shades of amber and crimson. "I think we're both refugees from the same war. The war between what we were supposed to be and what we actually are." Elon's ears perked up, and he shifted closer, close enough now that Orin could see the fine details of his coat, the way the light caught in his eyes. "I should head back to my ship," Orin said reluctantly. "It's going to get cold out here, and I don't have the coat you do." He paused, then added with a self-conscious laugh, "You're welcome to come along if you want. It's not much, but it's warm." He didn't really expect the wolf to follow. Wild creatures, even genetically modified ones, didn't typically seek out human companionship. But as he stood and began walking back toward his ship, he heard the soft pad of paws behind him. The journey back was slow, both beings seeming reluctant to break the fragile connection they'd forged. The twin moons of Xerox had risen by the time they reached the battered freighter, casting everything in an ethereal silver glow. Orin stopped at the ship's entrance, suddenly uncertain. Inviting a massive predator into his living space seemed like the height of folly, but something in his gut told him it was the right thing to do. "This is it," he said, gesturing to the ship. "Home sweet home. Such as it is." Elon studied the vessel with those penetrating blue eyes, then looked back at Orin. There was a question in that gaze, and Orin found himself nodding in response. "Yeah," he said softly. "Come on in." The ship's interior was a study in organized chaos, tools scattered across every available surface, jury-rigged repairs held together with hope and determination, and the constant hum of systems that were working far harder than they should have been. It was the domain of a man who lived alone and worked with his hands, functional but far from beautiful. Elon padded inside, his massive frame seeming to fill the small space. He moved carefully, as if aware that this was someone else's territory and he was a guest. The wolf settled near the main console, curling into a tight ball but keeping his eyes on Orin. "Ground rules," Orin said, though his tone was gentle rather than commanding. "No chewing on the wires, I need those. And try not to knock over any of the delicate equipment. Other than that." He shrugged. "Make yourself at home." As night fell properly, the ship's heating system kicked in, filling the space with blessed warmth. Orin found himself a bottle of synthetic whiskey, his one luxury, and settled into his pilot's chair. Elon's breathing had deepened, though his eyes remained alert. "You know," Orin said, taking a sip of his drink, "I came here looking for salvage. Didn't expect to find a friend." At the word friend, Elon's ears perked up. The wolf's tail gave another of those barely perceptible wags, and something in his expression seemed to soften. Orin reached for an old blanket and tossed it gently over the wolf's massive form. "Get some rest, big guy. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." As he settled back in his chair, Orin felt something he hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not happiness, exactly, but a sense that perhaps the universe wasn't entirely indifferent to his existence. Outside, the wind howled across Xerox's desolate surface, but inside the ship, two unlikely companions had found something worth protecting. Neither could have known that their peaceful interlude was about to be shattered by the arrival of visitors who would challenge everything they thought they knew about survival, loyalty, and the bonds that could form between the most unlikely of allies. Unwelcome visitors. 3 weeks had passed since that first encounter, and the unlikely partnership between man and wolf had settled into a comfortable routine. Orin would spend his mornings working on his ship's seemingly endless maintenance needs while Elon explored the surrounding wasteland, always returning by midday with small game or interesting salvage he'd discovered. Their afternoons were spent together, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes with Orin talking about the stars while Elon listened with rapt attention. It was the best 3 weeks either of them had experienced in years. The peace was shattered on a gray morning when the distant rumble of engines echoed across Xerox's barren landscape. Orin looked up from the wiring panel he'd been wrestling with, his blood running cold. In all his research about Xerox, every source had been clear: the planet was abandoned, forgotten, visited by no one. Elon burst through the ship's entrance, his hackles raised and his blue eyes wild with alarm. The wolf's agitation was infectious, and Orin felt his own heart rate spike as he moved to the viewport. 3 sleek vessels descended through the gray clouds, military-grade interceptors with the distinctive black and gold markings of the Galactic Consortium. These weren't merchants or salvagers. They were hunters. Shit, Orin breathed, his mind racing. The Consortium didn't send military vessels to abandoned worlds without good reason. They were looking for something specific. His eyes met Elon's, and understanding passed between them like a bolt of lightning. They weren't here for the planet. They were here for the wolf. The lead ship touched down about half a kilometer away, close enough to make escape impossible but far enough to establish a tactical perimeter. Orin watched through his scope as armored figures disembarked, 6 soldiers in full combat gear, moving with the precision of an elite unit. "They found you," Orin whispered, and Elon's ears flattened against his skull. The wolf's entire body was coiled like a spring, every instinct screaming at him to run or fight. A communication request crackled through the ship's systems. Orin hesitated, then accepted the connection. A cold, professional voice filled the cabin. "Attention vessel on surface. This is Commander Reese of the Galactic Consortium Special Recovery Division. You are in violation of planetary quarantine protocols. Prepare to be boarded for inspection." Orin keyed the microphone with hands that trembled slightly. "This is Orin Vex aboard the freighter Wanderer. I wasn't aware of any quarantine. What's this about?" "Mr. Vex, our records show you as a licensed salvage operator. We're tracking a stolen Consortium asset that may have found its way to this planet. Your cooperation would be appreciated." Stolen asset. Orin's jaw tightened. They were talking about Elon like he was a piece of equipment. "I haven't seen anything that might qualify as Consortium property," Orin replied carefully. "Just a lot of empty wasteland and industrial wreckage." There was a pause, then Reese's voice returned, noticeably cooler. "Mr. Vex, we'll be conducting a thorough search of your vessel and the surrounding area. Please remain aboard your ship and comply with all instructions." The transmission ended, leaving Orin and Elon staring at each other in the sudden silence. Through the viewport, they could see the soldiers spreading out, beginning a systematic sweep of the terrain around the landing site. "They're not going to give up," Orin said quietly. "Are they?" Elon whined softly, a sound of distress that cut through Orin's heart like a blade. The wolf moved to the viewport, watching the soldiers with eyes that held a terrible understanding. He had been property once. They wanted to make him property again. Orin's mind raced through options and discarded them just as quickly. His ship was fast, but not faster than military interceptors. He was armed, but not well enough to take on a squad of Consortium soldiers. Running would only delay the inevitable, and fighting would get them both killed. But as he looked at Elon, at the intelligence in those blue eyes, at the trust the wolf had placed in him, Orin felt something harden in his chest. He'd been discarded by the galaxy once already. He'd be damned if he'd let them do the same thing to his friend. "Elon," he said softly, and the wolf's attention snapped to him. "I need you to listen carefully. There's an old mining tunnel about 2 kilometers north of here. I saw it on the geological surveys. It goes deep, with multiple branches. If you can make it there without being seen." Elon's head tilted, and he made a soft sound that might have been disagreement. He didn't want to leave. "I know," Orin said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to go either. But if they take you back..." He couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew what the Consortium did with failed experiments. A proximity alarm chimed. The soldiers were getting closer. Orin moved to his equipment locker and pulled out a small emergency beacon. "Take this," he said, clipping it to the thick fur around Elon's neck. It's got a 10-day power supply. When it's safe, when they're gone, I'll find you. Elon looked at the beacon, then back at Orin. The wolf's expression was heartbreakingly human in its sadness and understanding. Go, Orin whispered, fighting back tears he hadn't shed in decades. Please. I'll stall them as long as I can. For a moment, Elon didn't move. Then he stepped forward and gently pressed his massive head against Orin's chest, a gesture of affection and farewell that nearly broke the old mechanic's resolve. Then the wolf was gone, slipping out through the ship's rear access hatch and disappearing into the maze of industrial wreckage that surrounded the landing site. Orin watched him go, then turned back to his controls and began preparing for the performance of his lifetime. When the soldiers reached his ship 10 minutes later, they found him casually working on his engines, humming an old Spacer's tune as if he didn't have a care in the universe. Commander Reese was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Vex," she said without preamble, "we need to search your vessel." "Of course," Orin replied with his best attempt at confused cooperation. "Though I have to say, I'm curious about what you think you'll find. This old bucket hasn't carried anything more exotic than replacement parts in months." They tore through his ship with military efficiency, scanning every compartment, every storage bay, every possible hiding place. They found nothing, of course, but Orin could see the frustration building in Reese's expression. "Our sensors detected biological signatures in this area," she said finally. Orin shrugged. "Could be scavenger rats. This whole planet's lousy with them." The signature was much larger. "Well," Orin said, scratching his head in apparent confusion, "maybe something got past me. Like I said, lot of empty ground out there. Easy to miss things." Reese studied him with those cold eyes, clearly trying to determine whether he was lying. Orin met her gaze steadily, drawing on every ounce of acting ability he possessed. "We'll be conducting an extended search of the area," Reese said finally. "You're free to go, but don't leave the system until we've completed our operation." "Wouldn't dream of it," Orin replied. "How long do you think this might take?" "As long as necessary." As the soldiers departed to continue their search, Orin allowed himself a small smile. He'd bought Elon some time, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The consortium was nothing if not thorough, and they had resources he couldn't match. But he also had something they didn't, a bond forged in loneliness and tempered by mutual understanding. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't abandon the first real friend he'd had in years. The hunt was on, and Orin Vex was about to discover just how far he was willing to go to protect the ones he loved. The hunt. For 3 days, the consortium soldiers methodically combed Xerox's wasteland while Orin watched from his ship, maintaining the facade of a confused salvager caught up in military business. The beacon around Elon's neck remained silent, which he hoped meant the wolf had found safety in the deep mining tunnels. But hope was becoming a scarce commodity. On the 4th morning, Commander Reese approached Orin's ship with a portable scanner in her hands and a grim expression on her face. She held up the device, which pulsed with a steady blue light. "DNA traces," she announced without preamble. "Inside your vessel. Fresh ones. K9, but with genetic markers we've been tracking for 6 years." Orin's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. "DNA? Commander, I hate to break it to you, but I'm just a mechanic. I wouldn't know genetic markers from breakfast cereal." "The asset we're tracking," Reese continued, ignoring his protest, "is extremely dangerous. Enhanced strength, intelligence, and predatory instincts. If you've encountered it and failed to report the contact, you've committed a serious crime." "Look," Orin said, spreading his hands in a gesture of apparent helplessness, "if there's some kind of dangerous animal out there, don't you think I'd have mentioned it? I may be old, but I'm not suicidal." Reese studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Vex, I'm going to ask you once more, and I strongly advise you to tell the truth. Have you seen the asset?" The weight of the moment pressed down on Orin like a physical force. He could confess, throw himself on their mercy, hope they'd show leniency for cooperation. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Instead, he looked Commander Reese in the eye and lied with every fiber of his being. "No," he said firmly. "I haven't seen any dangerous animals, genetic experiments, or whatever else you're looking for. Just me, my ship, and a whole lot of empty rock." Reese's expression hardened. "Then you won't mind if we expand our search parameters." She turned away and spoke into her communicator. "All units, initiate deep scan protocol. Underground caverns, mining tunnels, anywhere large enough to conceal a target. Use the resonance charges if necessary." Orin's blood turned to ice. Resonance charges would collapse the tunnel system, sealing off Elon's hiding place, possibly with him inside. He had to act, and he had to act now. "Commander," he called out, desperation creeping into his voice despite his efforts to remain calm. "Those mining tunnels, they're unstable. You bring the whole network down, you might cause surface collapses. Could damage your ships." "Our ships can handle a little vibration," Reese replied coldly. "Execute the charges." That night, as the soldiers set up their explosive charges throughout the tunnel network, Orin made a decision that would have seemed impossible to him just a month ago. He was going to commit treason against the Galactic Consortium, and he was going to do it for a wolf he'd known for less than a month. Working by the light of his ship's emergency illumination, Orin carefully disabled the safety protocols on his vessel's main reactor. It was dangerous, criminally so, but it would give him the power surge he needed for what came next. At 0200 hours, when the soldiers were at their most vulnerable, Orin activated every electromagnetic pulse device he could jury-rig from his ship's systems. The blast fried every piece of electronic equipment within a 2-kilometer radius, including the detonation controls for the resonance charges. The consortium soldiers found themselves stranded in the dark with dead communication equipment and useless weapons. It wouldn't stop them permanently, but it bought precious time. Orin was already moving, a powerful flashlight in one hand and his emergency beacon tracker in the other. The signal from Elon's beacon led him through a maze of collapsed machinery and treacherous terrain toward the northern tunnel entrance. He found Elon 3 levels down, huddled in a chamber that had once housed processing equipment. The wolf looked up as Orin's light swept over him, and the relief in those blue eyes was unmistakable. "Come on, boy," Orin whispered urgently. "Time to go." They made their way back through the tunnel system, but as they emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, Orin could see lights moving in the distance. The soldiers had backup equipment, and they were closing in. "The ship," Orin muttered, then shook his head. "No, they'll have that covered." His mind raced through options. The mining facility's old transport tubes ran for kilometers underground, but most were collapsed or flooded. The communications array on the ridge might have working transmitters, but that would just bring more consortium forces. Then he remembered something from the geological surveys, an old geothermal vent that led to a natural cave system on the planet's far side. It was a desperate gamble, but it might be their only chance. They ran through the darkness, man and wolf moving with desperate synchronization across terrain that could kill the unwary. Behind them, the pursuit was gaining ground, flashlight beams sweeping back and forth like deadly fingers. The vent entrance was exactly where the surveys had indicated, a crack in the ground barely wide enough for a human, leading down into Stygian blackness. The walls were warm to the touch, heated by the planet's core, and the air that rose from the depths carried the sulfurous smell of mineral springs. "It's going to be tight," Orin warned, but Elon was already squeezing through the opening. The wolf's genetic modifications included enhanced flexibility along with everything else. They descended in darkness, following a natural chimney that led deep into Xerox's crust. The walls grew warmer as they went down, and soon they could hear the distant sound of running water. The cavern they emerged into was vast, lit by the faint phosphorescence of mineral deposits and heated by underground springs. It was like stepping into an alien cathedral, beautiful and terrible in its alien majesty. "We can rest here," Orin said, exhaustion making him dizzy. "They'll never find us in this maze." But even as he spoke, he knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The consortium wouldn't give up easily, and their resources were virtually unlimited. Eventually, they would be found. Elon seemed to sense his despair. The wolf moved close, pressing his warm flank against Orin's side. In that simple gesture was a communication more profound than words. Whatever happened, they would face it together. "I'm sorry," Orin whispered into the wolf's fur. "I'm sorry I couldn't do better." Elon's response was a gentle lick to his cheek, forgiveness, understanding, and loyalty all wrapped into one simple action. Above them, the hunt continued, but in the depths of Xerox's hidden heart, two unlikely friends had found something worth more than freedom. They had found each other. The question now was whether that bond would be strong enough to survive what was coming. Freedom's price. They spent 2 days in the underground cavern, surviving on emergency rations and the surprisingly pure water from the mineral springs. Orin had hoped the consortium would eventually give up and leave, but the steady vibration of heavy machinery above them told a different story. They were using deep-bore scanners now, methodically mapping every underground space on the planet. It was only a matter of time. On the third morning, as they shared what might be their last meal together, Orin came to a decision that had been building in his mind since their flight began. "Elon," he said softly, and the wolf's attention focused on him with that uncanny intelligence. "I need you to listen to me, really listen. There's something I have to tell you." He pulled out his portable datapad, one of the few pieces of equipment that had survived the electromagnetic pulse. His fingers flew over the keys, accessing files he'd thought he'd never need again. "I wasn't always a down-and-out mechanic," he began. 20 years ago, I worked for the consortium myself. Different division, legitimate work, or so I thought. I helped design life support systems for research facilities. Including the one where you were created. Elon's ears perked up, his blue eyes intensifying with interest and perhaps recognition. "I never knew what they were really doing in those labs until it was too late," Orin continued, his voice heavy with old guilt. "When I found out about the genetic experiments, the test subjects, the ones who didn't survive. I tried to blow the whistle. That's when I discovered how deep the corruption went." He turned the datapad so Elon could see the screen, though he doubted the wolf could read the technical specifications displayed there. "This is your genetic profile," he explained. "Your real one, not the sanitized version they kept in the official files. And hidden in the code, buried so deep they never found it, is something I put there. A kill switch that would shut down all your enhanced abilities if activated." Elon tilted his head, clearly not understanding the implications. "But I also coded in a counter-protocol," Orin said with a sad smile. "One that would make you completely untrackable by their systems. The only problem is, activating it requires access to a consortium terminal." A distant rumble shook dust from the cavern ceiling. The scanners were getting closer. "The thing is," Orin continued, his voice growing softer, "I can get you to one of those terminals. Commander Reese's ship has exactly what we need. But getting there means surrendering myself to give you a chance to escape." Elon whined softly, pressing closer to Orin's side. The wolf seemed to understand that they were discussing separation again. "Listen to me," Orin said, gripping the thick fur around Elon's neck. "Once I activate that protocol, you'll be free. Really free. No more running, no more hiding. You can go anywhere in the galaxy, and they'll never be able to track you again." He stood up, checking his equipment one final time. The plan was desperate, probably suicidal, but it was the only chance Elon had for real freedom. "There's a service tunnel that leads directly under their landing site," he explained. "You can get close without being detected. When you see me walk out of this cavern with my hands up, that's your signal to move." They made their way through the underground passages, following routes Orin had memorized from the mining surveys. When they reached the tunnel beneath the consortium ships, Orin knelt down and looked into Elon's eyes one last time. "You've been the best friend I've had in years," he said quietly. "Maybe the best I've ever had. Whatever happens up there, remember that you're not property. You're not a failed experiment. You're Elon, and you deserve to be free. The wolf's response was to gently lick Orin's weathered cheek, a gesture of affection that nearly broke the old mechanic's resolve. Go, Orin whispered. And live well. He climbed to the surface and walked out of the cavern entrance with his hands raised, calling out to the soldiers who immediately surrounded him with weapons drawn. I surrender, he announced loudly. I know where your asset is, and I'm willing to negotiate. Commander Reese approached, her expression cold but triumphant. Mr. Vex. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Yeah, well, Orin said with a shrug. Life's full of disappointments. As they escorted him toward the command ship, Orin caught a glimpse of white moving through the shadows beneath the vessel. Elon was in position. Before we proceed, Orin said as they reached the ship's entrance, I need to verify that you're actually who you claim to be. Consortium regs, you understand. Reese looked annoyed but led him to the ship's main computer terminal. Satisfy yourself, she said curtly. Orin's fingers moved over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. To any observer, it would look like he was simply accessing personnel files. In reality, he was uploading a very specific piece of code into the ship's systems. The moment the upload completed, every scanner, tracker, and detection device on the ship recalibrated itself. In the depths of the service tunnel, a small device around a white wolf's neck went dark as its tracking signature vanished from every consortium database in the galaxy. Well? Reese demanded. You check out, Orin said with a smile. Now, about that negotiation. What followed was a brief, tense conversation that ended exactly as Orin had expected it would. The consortium wasn't interested in deals with traders, and Commander Reese made it clear that his cooperation was no longer optional. But as they dragged him toward the detention cell, Orin felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, complete satisfaction. Through the viewport, he caught one last glimpse of Xerox's wasteland, and he could have sworn he saw a flash of white moving freely across the barren ground. 3 months later, in a prison facility on the edge of consortium space, Orin received an unexpected visitor. The guard who brought him to the meeting room said only that someone had paid considerable credits to arrange the visit and that questions weren't welcome. The figure waiting for him wore a hooded cloak that concealed their features, but when they pulled back the hood, Orin's heart nearly stopped. It was a young woman with snow-white hair and the most piercing blue eyes he'd ever seen. When she smiled, there was something wild and feral in the expression, but also unmistakably warm. Hello, old friend, she said in a voice that carried just a hint of a growl. I thought it was time I returned the favor. Orin stared in amazement. Elon. The genetic modifications included more than just physical enhancements, she explained. Shape-shifting was one of the abilities they built into me, though I never learned to control it until I was truly free. She paused, her expression growing serious. Free because of what you sacrificed for me. How did you get here? Learn to use my abilities. Acquire the resources to arrange this visit. She smiled again, and this time it was purely human. Let's just say that when you can become anyone you want to be, the galaxy becomes a much smaller place. She slid a small device across the table between them. Emergency transport beacon. One use only, but it'll get you anywhere in known space. I've also taken the liberty of arranging for some technical difficulties with the prison security systems. Nothing too dramatic, just a few minutes of convenient blindness. Orin picked up the beacon with trembling hands. You came back for me. Of course I did, Elon said, standing to leave. You taught me that some bonds are stronger than genetic programming. That friendship, real friendship, is worth any sacrifice. She pulled the hood back up, concealing her distinctive features. There's a whole galaxy out there, Orin. Places where two outcasts can make a new life together. What do you say? Orin looked at the beacon, then at the woman who had once been a white wolf he'd found on a forgotten planet. The choice was easy. Lead the way, he said. 5 minutes later, the detention facility's guards found an empty cell and no explanation for how their prisoner had vanished. By the time the investigation began, two friends were already light years away, beginning a new chapter of their unlikely story. They had found something the Galactic Consortium, for all its power and resources, could never understand or replicate: the transformative power of genuine connection, the strength that comes from choosing to care for another being, and the unbreakable bond between two souls who had saved each other from loneliness. In the end, they had both found exactly what they'd been searching for all along, not just freedom, but a place to belong. The end.